Hello, everybody. Let's do our last part of classification. These are your last notes for the week. So let's start by refreshing ourselves. As far as classification goes, everything falls under one of three domains. Every living thing falls under one of these three domains. We have archaea, which are our extremophiles. We have eubacteria, which are prokaryotes, and we have eukarya, which are eukaryotic cells. Under eukarya, there are different kingdoms. There's kingdom Plantae, kingdom Fungi, kingdom Animalia. And there's another one in there too, but we're just going to focus on the animal kingdom today. So today, you are going to look at examples of 7 different phylums or phyla underneath kingdom Animalia. And you need to know the characteristics of each of these 7 phylums of organisms. And as a grade, I'm going to ask you to make a dichotomous key for one of them. Okay, so let's learn about 7 different phyla under the animal kingdom. All right, so we're going to start over here. This is phylum Porifera. Like pores in your skin or openings. The common name for a bunch of things under this are sponges. Yes, like SpongeBob. And so what are some examples of this? Well, so here's a little group of sponges kind of all living together here. And there's a little offshoot over here. Living on a coral reef. You can see the coral in the background over here, but here's our sponge. Sponges have no body symmetry, and that means you can't draw a line down them somewhere and have them be in different or in opposite or in same halves. They have no mouth or anus. There's no one opening where food comes in or food goes out. Water just kind of comes into the sponge and leaves out of the sponge under the same sort of set of things. Okay? And finally, they may have, this one is a may, so not all sponges share this characteristic. They may have silica or calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is what shells are made of. Spicules, these little structures to help them, keep a structure. For structural support. Okay, that's phylum Porifera. Our next phylum is phylum Cnidaria. And these include things like, you can see them up above, jellyfish, Portuguese man-o'-war, corals, and things like that. You might say to yourself, wow, corals and jellyfish, they have things in common? Well, yeah, they do. Actually, Cnidaria refers to stinging cells. That's one of the things that coral is able to do. That it's able to invert itself and kind of sting and paralyze the prey. So Cnidarians have radial symmetry. Radial symmetry is different than the symmetry that you're used to where you can just cut something in half. Radial symmetry is like a circle. And when you have a circle, you could cut it like this, or 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 like that. You get the idea. There's lots of ways you can cut a circle. That's how Cnidarians work. All right. Cnidarians have a mouth, but no anus. So food comes in and out of the same way. And cnidarians may have tentacles with stinging cells. This is a may, though. Not all of them have this in common. All right, our next phylum is phylum Platyhelminthes. This is an example right here, right up above. They're commonly called flatworms. And most of you are like, I know what an earthworm is. Well, maybe you've heard of a tapeworm. A tapeworm is an example of a flatworm. Okay. Platyhelminthes have bilateral symmetry, which means there's one line that they can be cut down and have two sides of the same shape. Platyhelminthes also have a mouth but no anus, the same as the cnidarians. And they have a flattened body shape. A flattened body shape to increase the surface area to volume ratio. Not ration, just ratio. Okay. To increase the surface area to body ratio. And as we've learned, that helps with all kinds of things like absorption across a membrane and things like that. Oh, here's the worms that you're familiar with right here. In fact, this is another kind of worm. This is phylum Annelida. This picture is great right down here. This is an actual earthworm. They can get that big. Annelidans, these are segmented worms. Worms that you can like actually see a segment on them. That's what all these little lines on this earthworm are. Each of those is like an individual segment. So these include like earthworms, leeches. Those are the couple that you're probably the most familiar with. Annelidans have bilateral symmetry. They have a separate mouth and anus, which means that food comes in one and leaves out of the other. And they have ringed segments. So these segments go all the way around their body. And these segments are specialized. So some segments perform a different function than other segments. All right. Our third to last one. This is phylum Mollusca. Mollusca. Lots of things fall under phylum Mollusca. Snails, slugs, clams, octopi, squid. Yeah, lots of things fall under this. So just like annelids, they have bilateral symmetry, so you can cut them in half one way and have two different sides that are equal to each other. Bilateral symmetry. They, just like in the annelids, also have a mouth and an anus, so food comes in one side and waste leaves the other. And this group, their body structure is all the same. They have a mantle that is kind of an outer covering. Sometimes this mantle will produce a shell, like you can see on a clam or a snail. They have a muscular foot. It's not a foot like you and I are thinking of, but it's a muscular thing that can be used to manipulate and move itself around. And they have what is called a visceral mass. And that visceral mass is where a lot of its organs and stuff like that are. All right. Our second to last one up here. This is phylum Arthropoda. Arthropoda. Maybe you've heard of an arthropod. Arthro refers to joint, and pod refers to foot. So these are things with jointed foot. So arthropods include things like insects, centipedes, spiders, crustaceans like crab and shrimp and things like that. What else am I leaving off? Scorpions. Yeah. Okay, same as the previous couple. These have bilateral symmetry. They have a mouth and an anus. And their body has jointed sections to it. And they have a hard exoskeleton made of chitin. That's a material. It's not cellulose like in a plant cell wall, but it's what their exoskeletons are made of. And finally, we have phylum Chordata. Chordata include all of your normal things that you think of when you think of animals, and those are mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, amphibians. But this also includes some pretty unique things that you might not be thinking of that fall into our category, such as things called tunicates, which we'll talk about in just a second here. Okay, so what are some characteristics? Well, same as these last few. We have bilateral symmetry, a mouth, and an anus. And here's what separates us. All the things under phylum Chordata have a notochord. A notochord is a nerve that runs along the back. And there's also a hollow dorsal nerve tube for at least some of their development. Dorsal means that it runs along the back. So for us, you can think about our spinal column. So that includes all vertebrates. So all vertebrates with a backbone fall under this category. But these two things right here, this is like I think it's called a lancet fish, and then this is our tunicate right here. This tunicate here has bilateral symmetry, so you could slice it right down one half, but it also has a nerve cord that runs along its back. It looks vastly different from anything else that you can that you think of when you think of mammals and birds and reptiles and fish and amphibians and things like that. But oh man, it's got that nerve cord the same as us. But what it doesn't have is some of those characteristics that make vertebrates vertebrates. All right, so those are the 7 phylums in kingdom Animalia that you need to know. And so for our last section, let's focus on phylum Chordata. There's a subphylum under Chordata that includes vertebrates. Okay, so vertebrata is the name of a subphylum. And so what we're going to do right now is we are going to go through 5 classes. Remember, kingdom, phylum, class. So we're going to go through 5 classes of subphylum Vertebrata. I'm not going to have any pictures on here for this one because I believe you know what these things are. Okay, let's start with fish. Fish are covered in scales, made out of bony plates in the skin. They reproduce via external fertilization. That means that there's no, like the male doesn't deposit its sperm inside of the female. Instead, the eggs are laid on the outside of the female, and the male comes along and outside of the body just deposits a bunch of sperm over the egg, and that's how their fertilization happens. They breathe through gills. Fish breathe through gills. I believe you knew this one. They breathe oxygen just like us. They're just able to pull oxygen out of water, and we can't. And they are ectothermic, which means they are cold-blooded. They cannot maintain their own body temperature. Okay, underneath fish we have amphibians. Okay, so amphibians have moist skin. It's permeable to gases and water. Remember, permeable means that it can pass through. So that's actually how they absorb some of their oxygen. In fact, some amphibians absorb oxygen better through their skin than they do through breathing. They reproduce through external fertilization, same as the fish. And because they reproduce through external fertilization, they need water to do that. And so the larva is normally in the water. They can breathe through lungs. They can breathe through lungs, but they do absorb a lot of oxygen through their skin, and they are also ectothermic, which means they don't regulate their own body temperature. All right, next up from amphibians is reptiles, covered in scales made of keratin. Covered in scales made of keratin. They reproduce via internal fertilization. Fertilization. And the females lay eggs. But there's a difference here between these eggs and the other eggs that are formed. These eggs have soft shells on them. Soft shells. They breathe through lungs. They breathe through lungs. And they have a lot of folds in those lungs. Now, when I say folds in those lungs, I mean like us, like alveoli and things like that. And reptiles are also ectothermic, which means they don't regulate their own body temperature. All right, second to last one, birds. Birds, even penguins, have feathers made of keratin. Okay, birds reproduce via internal fertilization. And eggs have hard shells on them. We know this one for sure. They breathe through lungs. And birds are our first species that are endothermic, which means they're warm-blooded. They can maintain their own internal body temperature. Finally, we have us, mammals. Okay, our skin has follicles. And these follicles produce hair made of keratin. All right. Okay. We fertilize internally. Don't call me out on the platypus here. That's a weird one. And females have mammary glands to nurse their young. And yes, that includes things like whales. And we are endothermic. Oh, I should also add that we also breathe through lungs. We're the only species with alveoli. I said earlier when I mentioned the reptiles, they have a lot of foldings. They don't have alveoli, but I just mean like, increased tubes and folds to increase the amount of surface area that you can breathe through. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to practice making a dichotomous key to identify these classes of vertebrates and these classes, and these phyla these phyla of animals. And remember that when you make your dichotomous key, each step only needs to focus on one characteristic. So for example, under vertebrata, everything was either endothermic or exothermic. You could start with that. Is it endothermic or exothermic? And then in tomorrow's quiz, I'm gonna ask you to make a key, and then I'm gonna pick one of these things, and you're gonna ask me the questions in your key, and we'll see if we get it right. All right, that's it for today. Bye-bye.